What's up, everybody? It's your boy Sifu Topher, the other Wing Chun guy. Just finished recording an episode of the podcast with my SiHing. We did a little interview. So my SiHing, Chris Hope, Mr. Hope Wing Chun on the Instagrams, popped in, asked me some questions from the internet, and we had ourselves a good time. Some shenanigans, some deep thoughts, and in general, a great conversation on Wing Chun. Hope you all enjoyed the episode as much as we enjoyed recording it. As usual, I want to give a shout out to Sifu Jose, Andrew Lim, and of course Chris Berry. Chris, Kara says hi. Yo, SiHing, what's going on?
Hey Topher, good to be with you.
Good to be with you. Good to have you on the show. You're the first guest. Numero
Well,
uno.
well, I'm honored that you would have me on. Just to give a little context to people that follow your channel, Topher and I live just a couple of miles away from each other. So we had planned when we discussed this to sit in the same room and meet in person, but our schedules have, for whatever reason, not allowed for that. And I'm pleased to report that I am fully recovered from the virus of unknown origin, which disrupted our first attempt to get together, but we're finally making up for lost time. So thank you very much for having me.
Oh, absolutely. It's always great to chit chat. So you have questions for me.
I do. I have a
Okay.
number of questions. I should probably tease also that I even have a surprise guest has given me a question they want me to ask you, but perhaps I'll save that till later because it's maybe a little bit of a hypothetical style question. Let me put it that way. But perhaps we should leave that till a little bit later. I also goes to show how long ago we had initially planned this, going back a month or two now. But I had it in my notes for our chat today. Before anything, I just wanted to extend congratulations to our Kung Fu brother, Alan, who a short while ago swam across the English Channel from England to France. Those of you familiar with the Channel swim, it is a very impressive accomplishment. You have to be obviously in great shape, but you also have to have a good amount of determination. So our Kung Fu brother Alan did the Channel crossing and put up a pretty respectable time. I can't remember exactly how quickly he did it, but it was a pretty respectable time.
Yeah.
But regardless, it's quite an accomplishment. And so, on behalf of myself, I wanted to extend our congratulations for really an impressive achievement. We're very, very proud of him. So
Absolutely. So hopefully he can get back to Wing Chun now that he's
absolutely no excuses. Yeah, if he can do that, there's no I don't think there's anything that's going to be too demanding in Wing Chun class. So yeah.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. When he had told me, I think back in February, that he's like, "Oh yeah, by the way, I'm training to swim the English Channel." And I said, "Really?" He goes, "Yeah, so once I get that done." But he did it, and like you said, I can't remember the time either. I thought it was like 10 hours or something like that. It was a very, very impressive amount of time.
It was impressive, and he was explaining to me, I sent him a message of congratulations. He was explaining that just by pure coincidence, the person that set the new world record was swimming the same day as him. So yeah, obviously a lot of the attention was on this guy. I think he was a German guy or something, but he set the new record. But here's the thing, like, people are going to set records for that kind of thing, but the feat in itself is impressive. I don't care how long it takes to swim the channel. You're basically swimming for an entire day. That's pretty cool in my book. So
absolutely. So maybe we'll have Alan on to talk about swimming the English Channel.
That would be really cool. Yeah, actually,
I've
other than a few messages here and there, I've not chatted with him for a while. But yeah, I mean, I bring up Alan. Obviously, we are very fortunate in our local area, the Sarasota, Bradenton area in South Florida. We're very fortunate to have come across many talented martial artists, some of whom have, ended up training Wing Chun with us, or visitors from other places. But just in Sarasota alone, lots of great people here. But perhaps some people that follow you don't necessarily know your Wing Chun background specifically. So that was, the first question I wanted to get out of the way. I wanted to ask you about basically the Ho Kam Ming family of Wing Chun, which is the one that we are predominantly tied to. How did you learn about Ho Kam Ming? Where did that discovery fall in your Wing Chun career? Because I know you've done Wing Chun previously to joining the Ho Kam Ming branch.
Sure.
And what appealed about our particular style to you, as opposed to, say, other styles or lineages that you had done before? What piqued your interest?
Sure. So for me, it kind of two ways of answering this question, or two parts, I should say. So the first part is I've been involved in Chinese martial arts for a long time. I actually about 20 years now total. I came to Wing Chun about 10 years ago, 11 years ago. Um, and I did start in a different different Wing Chun lineage. I started in uh essentially the Moyat lineage,
Right.
is what it would have been. I had learned from a friend of mine named Bob, who had started out in started out in the Lung Ting lineage, and in the his teacher had moved things over to the Moyat lineage. It's kind of a lot going on there. And what happened was we were kind of in this weird place of flux. So I trained with him for about a year and a half, almost 2 years. But we were in this weird place of flux. And what ended up happening is he took me to meet you and our Sifu Renee at that time, who are from the Ho Kam Ming branch. And so we got together and we had that first class in the park, and that was a
Yes,
lot
I
of fun.
remember.
Oh
Yeah.
man. That was it was you, Alan, and I can't remember his name. He moved to Texas.
Yeah, we've had we had another
Mm.
Alan in the group, I think, at the time.
I think he
We
was
had
the other Alan.
Jake as well. We had and to explain to people
Yeah,
that don't necessarily know, when we're talking about the park here in Florida, we are
yeah,
blessed to live just a few short miles away from like some really awesome beaches. And some of our downtown parks in Sarasota, some of them are literally right in the marina.
yeah,
So when we're talking about the park, it's the most beautiful place. If you're going to practice outside, you've got a nice sea breeze, very often a
yep,
cool sunset, people walking their dogs. It's really cool vibes. So,
yeah,
sometimes we get curious people come to check us out. But on this
absolutely.
particular occasion,
Yep,
it was another Wing Chun school coming to visit.
yep,
And I had not met you at this point either. So this was
yep,
our first introduction. So
yep.
that's interesting. I wasn't sure how much you had known about Ho Kam Ming before meeting us, or what
Nope.
the deal was there.
That was pretty much it. That was I mean, I had heard the name. I'd seen a couple of the old videos that had been put up.
Sure.
Um, and what happened was after that, uh, Bob and I had a conversation. Bob wanted to continue his training and I wanted to keep learning more. And it was a case of like, well, I'm going to go this way and you're going to go that way. And if we meet
Sure.
back in the middle, let's find out what happens. So I contacted Renee and said, hey, I'm interested in coming and training with you. And he said, well, you'd have to pretty much start from scratch and we'd have to figure out where you fall in the line of things. I said, okay, fine by me. I had no problem with that. And kind of the rest is history, I suppose.
Yeah.
After
And
that, it's
and
just
don't sell yourself short there, because being perfectly honest, when you arrived, with us, your skill was, already on a really a fantastic level at that point. So, it was by no means the case that you had to relearn the whole system. And you can see obviously the ancestry obviously is close, and that's
yeah,
probably why it wasn't a big adjustment for you.
no,
Obviously, a lot of people know that Moya and Ho Kam Ming were. Would you say they were kind of early to middle
they're
period
both
students?
middle period students. They fall um So like you think like 1950 to 1957, it's kind of
Yeah.
like that first period. That's when you get your Lok Yu, Leung Sheng, Wang Shenglong, Bruce Lee, all them, they all fall into that. Chu Shengtin and all them, they're kind of in that first period. And of course, Chan Chi Man, Sifu are all kind of in that period. And then you get into the late 50s, and that's when you get the Moyat and the Hokan. It's funny enough, I kind of actually, because it was always kind of a question I had, is like, when exactly did Ho Sifu start learning from Yip Man? I pinned it down, had to have been late 58 to early 59. And the reason for
Hmm.
that being is that in an interview, Hawkeye Ming says, yes, when I first started learning Wing Chun, I met Bruce Lee right before he left for America.
Yeah.
We cheese out and he beat me. He was much better. I had only been learning for a few months. He had been learning for a few years, or something to that effect. And I was like, oh, okay. So that means he started probably in like 59 because Bruce left for the US in 59,
Makes
59 right
sense.
in there.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh, well, there you go. There's kind of one
Yeah,
of those
no,
rare
I didn't
times.
know that. Yeah, I imagined it was around that time period. But yeah, the
Yeah.
question, in a separate conversation the other day, what would be your relationship to Bruce Lee? And I had to say, I honestly don't know because I'm not sure if our Gung was senior or junior. It sounds like he was junior.
Junior. He was junior to him.
So
Yep.
Bruce would be our Sibak Gung, I would guess, our
Yep.
senior
Senior.
senior
Yep.
granduncle.
Yep.
But yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, I was much the same. I didn't know anything. So this is how green I was coming into Wing Chun. Is I didn't know who Ho Kam Ming was. I didn't know who Yip Man was. I had a peripheral pop culture level knowledge of Bruce Lee. I was like, oh yeah, Bruce Lee does those cool movies. But that was never the selling point. I met my Dai SiHing Gabe before I had met Sifu, and we were good friends. We were musicians in bands together and would like to hang out. And I was curious about martial arts. I think I'd done
Right.
some introduction Taekwondo, and it
Yeah.
wasn't for me. But when our SiHing Gabe, our Dai SiHing, was explaining Wing Chun, I was like, that sounds perfectly logical. It sounds very economical. And just my Spock brain that I seem to have all the time with stuff like that, I was like, okay, this makes sense. I want to know more. So I was very much sold on the system from its first utterances to me, without necessarily my knowledge of people like Yip Man. That came later. So when
Right.
I went for my first class with Sifu Rene, I heard about Bruce Lee and Yip Man. I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like this is there's obviously something there, but I was mostly curious about the art itself. And by some ill fortune, that first class I had, and I was introduced to Rene, and I was like, I'm interested. When's the next class? And it was at that point Sifu Rene said, yeah, that's great. I'm leaving and moving back to San Diego. I was like, great. But it was at that point that Sifu said, you're friends with Gabe. Gabe is now at an instructor level. You should learn from him. And I did. So while I credit Gabe as being, my Dai SiHing in many respects, he was my first Sifu in that sense. So he took me through the early stages, and it was a couple of years later when Rene actually moved back to Sarasota, and we, continued there. But credit to older brothers for getting me on a good head start with that.
Yep.
So yeah.
Absolutely.
But yeah, I didn't know much of Ho Kam Ming. I learned that stuff through osmosis over the first
Yeah.
months and years that we were studying, and unfortunately, I never got to meet the late Sigong before he passed.
Yeah.
But something that always stood out to me in the very political and sometimes hostile world of Wing Chun is I, for myself, have never heard a bad word said about Ho Kam Ming. He seems to be well respected from all sides. So that was something that I always took note of, that this seemed to be a fellow that by all accounts was unimpeachable in terms of his character and his reputation for training real fighters.
Changes.
Let's
Yeah.
be honest, a lot of the guys coming out of Macau at that time, could give the Hong Kong guys a run for their money. They were,
Well,
you know, Ho Kong Ming in particular had a reputation for putting good fighters out of its school. So once I learned
absolutely.
all of this, I was very satisfied that I had, you know,
Yeah.
talked to the right people at the right time.
Yeah.
So
Well, and to answer kind of the second part of your question, what kept me around, what kept me, like, what made me say, okay, this
that's
is
it.
the
Yeah,
way we're gonna go. It's you know, the Hokaming methodology is just like you said, it is inherently because Wing Chun is refined, economical, but there is just how thorough and well coordinated everything is, how our teacher taught us, and how, when we went to Macau and visited our Seabox and Seasooks and all them, and how very well, again, like you said, one, how well respected Sigong was, and how, we could go somewhere and say, okay, what lineage are you from? Hokaming. And they go, okay, you can come, you're good. Come in, come in, come in.
yeah,
Um, but also, I can say, having trained Wing Chun with others, I can say, you know, the Ming concept and the way we develop chi sao and control and things like that have really served me to be able to adapt when I visit other lineages, and working with other lineages, and my ability to just kind of drop in and go, okay, what are we doing? Oh, this is what we're doing. All right, great, let's go. And not have, almost not miss a beat, save for a few lineage specific differences.
sure.
Um,
I think, as you said, with the Ho Kong Ming period being, you know, kind of roughly in the middle or early middle, it means we can very often find similarities with early Wing Chun to what we do, and then later Wing Chun to what we do,
Absolutely.
which is very fortuitous when it comes to, as we've done and visited sometimes other branches that perhaps from a different lineage to us, but there was enough common, you know, commonality there that we could figure out what was going on and learn some new interesting different things that we've not seen before. But there's enough common DNA there that that makes it very easy. And again, we've been very blessed that, you know, a lot of people have been very welcoming um,
Absolutely.
to our group and have invited us into train, because I know some lineages that, you know, they don't get on so well with each other. And
Yeah.
so we're very thankful to all the people that have opened their doors to us and been generous with their time and their training. That's in Hong Kong and Macau and,
Yeah.
you know, various places in the States and the UK. We're very fortunate, and we do appreciate our
Absolutely.
kung fu friends, even the
Yes.
ones that we only talk to online, because you
Absolutely.
know, it's good to have friends.
Absolutely. And it's a good point you bring up there, and it harkens back to the old days. When I used to really get out there and push the dudes at Kung Fu podcast with my late friend Big Sean and Sifu Alex. There's something Sifu Alex always said at the had like a at the end of each episode, which was, you know, if you love martial arts, go out and talk, because the only way we're going to end the hostile and caustic discourse is to open ourselves up to each other and just have these conversations. And even though you might disagree with someone, that doesn't mean they love martial arts any less than you do, or vice versa. Like, just be open to these conversations. And I think now
Sure.
more than ever, especially with the advent of things like Instagram and stuff, where people are just, we're all just putting stuff out.
Yeah.
We're all putting stuff out, whether we like it or not. We're all putting stuff out, and that's fine. And it's letting us each say our piece, and that's, my hope is that that's over time going to help make things better.
Yeah, we can only hope, right?
Hmm.
I just
So,
switch off. I don't listen to, I long ago I realized that I didn't really want to spend a lot of time on Facebook in terms of Wing Chun and stuff, because,
yeah,
you know, the things you like are the things you like, and the things you don't agree with, you know, it's rare that you get one over on those kind of things. So I
yeah,
don't like to go down there and, you know, perhaps get frustrated about how people do it. And I'm like, you know what? If you're enjoying what you're doing, that's totally cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, I have over the last few years in particular tried to shut myself off from certain walls of Facebook and the
Yeah.
discourse that I once happily got involved with. I realized there's really no point. It's not productive.
No.
It doesn't improve your Wing Chun.
Nope.
So yeah, I think it's very healthy now that we've got a lot of outlets like your podcast and others that we follow. That can talk about these ideas in a sensible, measured way. People are not
Yeah.
going to get upset. Well, people I'm sure do get
Always
upset,
going to get upset.
but that's fine. You know,
Yeah.
you can't proceed anywhere in life with anything meaningful if you're afraid of what everybody thinks.
Yeah.
You know, do your thing. Do your thing.
Exactly. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Next question.
Yeah. All right. Let's do it. So this was a little more uh, more of a technical question.
Sure.
And I wanted to know if this was something that you had seen in your previous versions of Wing Chun, or if this is just something that you had encountered when you joined up with our group.
Mhm.
But we have always, in our system, obviously, you always start with the Sunim Tao, the first form. But in our system, we do the Sunim Tao certainly as a beginner's form. But our Sifu always stressed that the Sunim Tao, while it may be a beginner's form and the form you start with, in many respects, it is the advanced form. It is the form that after you learn the whole system, you then go back and re-examine much more closely the Sunim Tao and
Yep.
look for things in the foundation that you perhaps were not ready to see the first time.
Mhm.
And then there is looking at the form differently in that respect, but there is a more streamlined version of the form. Sometimes we'll do demonstrations and we'll do a
Yeah.
more streamlined version of the form with perhaps some of the intermediate transitions that the beginners have to learn. Some of those are smoothed out and all that kind of stuff. So we
Right.
think of there being a Sunim Tao and then an advanced Sunim Tao. Is
Okay.
that something that you had seen before?
Um,
What did you think of that when you first came
it's
across it?
so it's a concept that has always been ever present. Um, and I have seen it outside of our lineage. I've seen it in all, frankly, any worthwhile Wing Chun system will have this idea that it begins and ends with Sulam Tao. So for instance, let's take the end of Sulam Tao. Let's take the Bong Sao section, for instance. When you're a beginner, you're sitting here and you go Bong Sao, elbow in, hand out, up, back. And then you learn Chum Q. And what does Chum Q teach you? Not only teaches you to bonks out, but it teaches you to bonks out forward with forward intent. Boom, getting that out there. And then you take that back to Sulam Tao, and all of a sudden the Sulam Tao bonks out isn't just, okay, bonks out, it's, am I getting that forward? Am I getting that forward bit? Does this have that same elasticity as it does in the Chum Q? It's like it creates its own, it's one of the ingenious things about Wing Chun and why I think it's such a phenomenal system is whoever designed it essentially designed it with a feedback loop to help reinforce itself as you piece the rest of it together.
Yeah,
Which I mean, when you think about like the complexity of that, and it's why I'm okay. It's controversial statements here. It's why I don't believe in the mythology of our creation story
yeah,
because you don't create such two people don't come up with such an ingenious idea like that.
yeah.
It is
Great.
a collective of concepts that must have been brought together by multiple sources over a long period of time.
It
Uh,
certainly seems that way. Yeah,
it's to me, it's like language. Like how can you tell how old a language is? Well, by the complexity of the vernacular. Um, the linguistics of it. Wing Chun is a very refined, ingenious system in that sense, and obviously, it, it must have been in development for much longer than what we might generally think, at least in part or whole. And again, we know that the version of it we have now, Yitman himself had refined profusely, and up pretty much up until his passing had been tinkering with, and which is funny because even within our own lineage, that same thing, Hokam Ming, the more he trained it, the more he would go back to Sunum Tao, the more he would like refine things. Our own Sifu told us one time, he said, I've been doing this since 73. I go back to that first form and I always find something. And you always will find something. Um, but I found a video of Hokameng practicing Sulum Tao, and it was a video that I don't know he knew was being videotaped because
Oh, okay.
he very much, it was not a demonstration. He was kind of like off on the side, just doing the form, and he was doing it in a way that I'd never seen anybody else do it. But you could
Interesting.
see the wheels turning in his head as he's like thinking about the mechanics of what he was doing. And I'm like, yeah, because even in his later years, he was still going back to Silum Town and thinking about, wait a minute. It is very much it's like you said, there's a like the version you teach a beginner so that they can get the rudimentary movements down. Um, and then as they get better, as they get through the chum queue, you can start stripping away some of the like excess movements and go, well, this should actually, so for instance, a great example in our lineage is the Pak Sao. We do Pak. The way we learned it is set the hand, Pak,
Yeah.
back, shoot. And then at some point you can just, instead of setting the hand, you can just Pak, back, shoot. And then Pak, shoot. As you get the elbow mechanics down, you can just refine it and it just becomes boom. Same thing with the at the end of the Sambai foot section, the Pak, back, palm, and then at some point it just becomes Pak, palm, close, back. So the refinement of it, and so the short answer is yes. The I have seen it. I have talked with other sifus who I've gone to for information and to chat with, and they all have all said something very similar to that idea.
Cool.
And yeah, I mean, it just really is. It's an interesting and stepping stones. So each piece is like just another stepping stone, and then once you get the whole thing back together, yeah, you go back to Town, you realize everything else you learned is just feeding it.
Yeah, it's funny because yeah, I had heard the very same advice about Sudim Tao, which is if you're ever stuck on something in your Wing Chun training, something's not quite coming together quite right, and you're struggling to find a reason why, Sifu would always say, go back to the Sudim Tao.
Yep,
What is something with your Bong Sao or whatever, go back to the Sudim Tao and really examine it. And you can perhaps gain some insights from doing that to the very thing that has eluded you with perhaps something somewhere else in the system. And I have to admit, there have been many times when I've been stuck with something or the energy is just not quite right. I went back and looked at it, really examined it in the Sudim Town. I'm like, you know what? Maybe my elbow should be a little higher here, and
yep,
adjusting accordingly. And then when you put it into practice, you're like, okay, that makes sense.
yep,
But yeah, a lot of people perhaps don't have the patience to go back to the beginner's form when they've done the knives and the beauty and all that kind of stuff,
yep.
because I think some people are dismissive of it. But it's our alphabet,
It is. Yep,
and if you don't have the alphabet, or it scales. You're learning
yep.
learning an instrument. Do you want to be able to play Wonderwall straight
Hmm.
away, or would you rather somebody teaches you how to tune your instrument and have perfect pitch and know what all the scales are?
Yep,
And a classical system like Wing Chun gives you all of those foundational ingredients. Yeah, maybe you can't play Wonderwall right away, but you can play Bach if you practice it long enough. So
absolutely. I fully agree. Yep.
cool, cool. So the other thing I wanted to ask you about, and this is, perhaps less Wing Chun related and more just so your listeners and viewers can, start to understand you a little better. And of course, you have on previous episodes discussed some of your, favorite kung fu movies and all that kind of stuff. I want to know who is your biggest inspiration, but not from a martial arts background. So a figure that has perhaps inspired you
Mm,
that is not kung fu related directly.
not martial arts related. That's a good question. There's been a few. I'm a big anime nerd and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Um, so for instance, people who inspire me, like storytellers inspire me. People who can like weave these stories together. It blows my mind. So you have like, for instance, Akira Toriyama, creator of Dragon Ball. But people like the other things Toriyama has created, Sandland. He's done like all the Dragon Quest video games, or at least the concept art for all the Dragon Quest video games.
Yeah.
Um, different stuff, but he can weave stories together, and it just so happens, yes, he created one of the greatest martial arts stories there is, based
Sure.
off of Journey to the West. But that's kind of a big inspiration for me. And then I would say, I'm a big I like philosophy. I like um reading philosophy, and I was a big follower of the philosophy of Thich Nhat Hanh, famous Vietnamese Buddhist Zen Buddhist monk, who
Okay.
just had a very beautiful way of looking at things, in a very practical, non-esoteric way of interpreting various sutras and stuff. And he just simple things like in one of my favorite things is like, well, look, no mud, no lotus. We have to, in order to bloom, in order to grow, we have to really go through the thick of it. Um, um, I've read tons of philosophy. Autobiography of the Yogi, Paranasa Yoganananda, I believe is his name. Sorry
Sure.
if I mispronounced that, but it's quite a name. Big into philosophy, big into reading various writers and stuff like that. And then, of course, I would say, another historical figure, Marcus Aurelius. I mean,
Okay.
meditations and stuff, absolutely, Stoic philosophy and things like that. I thought, Marcus Aurelius was, of course, a very in-person, if you think about that, a very self-aware, self-thinking person who was in charge of the Roman Empire at basically the height of its size and power, and had to go, said, all right, we're not expanding anymore because it's just unsustainable. And then also had that thought process of himself. So
Well,
yeah,
and,
I'd
and
say,
remarkable in the sense that um, he had enough self-reflection to know that these ideas are sometimes important for people to understand, because
yeah,
there's not many examples, perhaps earlier than that, of you getting to see the inner thoughts of someone like this, and his thoughts were not frivolous. So I think
no,
for the modern disciplines of stoicism and all that kind of
yeah,
stuff, and even just people that want to analyze a character, um you know what a great gift that we've been able to basically get insights from
yeah,
such a person. And obviously, what's the kung fu equivalent of that, of course, is some of the posthumous notes of Bruce Lee.
Bruce, yeah,
Not necessarily making a direct comparison between the two, but similar in the sense of these are people that long after they've passed away, people are poring over their notes and
yeah,
trying to understand what were the true inner thoughts of this remarkable person.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, and it's definitely impressive to meet people like that. Another example, like Steve Jobs, good, bad, and indifferent, just like any other human being. But absolutely impressive what he had accomplished in his life, creating a computer company in a garage to now it's one of the biggest computer companies in the world. Here we are, iPhone, MacBook, chit chatting with you. Um,
Yeah, it's
And
ubiquitous, and you know, even somebody 20 years ago, if you could show them the world we're living in, they would be, you know, completely blown away. But stuff that people take, like kids in particular, they just completely, they don't remember a time when there wasn't such thing as an iPhone.
yeah,
Um, and you know that has obviously its impact on Wing Chun, our art as
hmm
well. You know, we think of this as like two separate problems, but when the authority on Wing Chun now is who has the most Instagram followers, for example, and then you look at
yeah,
what the content you're dealing with, and you know it's some very impressive gymnast or something, but they've
yep,
been you know trained to do all the right shapes to have a very convincing Wing Chun thing that you can throw on Instagram and get a gazillion
yep,
views. This is part of that same culture of electronic, like instant gratification that, you know, phones,
yep,
iPhones and whatnot have made all too easy.
yep,
Um, it kind of appeals to the lowest common denominator, and
yep,
unfortunately, the people that take it seriously and want to curate a genuine version of the art, that stuff unfortunately then gets lost in the
yep.
in the weeds, which is a shame, because if you were new coming to Wing Chun, genuinely curious, it's a very difficult to find the diamond in the rough. You know, people are going to
Absolutely.
you know have to find out the hard way,
Yep.
unfortunately.
But that's, that's gong fu in literal translation. It's time and effort. It's skill harnessed through time and effort. And you bring up a good point of instant gratification. We live in a society where people's attention spans just aren't there to do it. The people's ability to commit to that thing just isn't there to do it. Um, I hate to say it, but like in my previous episode where I talk about, um, Kung Fu's greatest dilemma. Well, one of Kung Fu's greatest dilemmas is the fact that it is a slow burn. It is not, it doesn't happen overnight. It happens over a process of many, many years.
Sure.
And we have to find a way to convince people that committing to that is worthwhile.
Yeah.
And when I think I mentioned, moving away from martial application, it should always be there. It should always be ever present because it is a martial art, but it is multifaceted, and we should be able to offer that multifaceted side to people. Yes, going back to Suum Tao, not just am I stuck on something in Wing Chun, am I stressed out at work? Can I take a walk and go practice my Suum Tao? Can I just go practice the Sun by Foot with three hands? Just breathe and relax myself with that way, refocus myself. It has a lot more to offer than just the fighting. That is the
Yeah.
fun part, but there's more to it than that. And it is just showing people that and showing them that this is why it is worth this lifelong, basically a lifelong time commitment to this thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, it's one of those things that, you know, we hope that new people come and find the art, not necessarily from us specifically, but you
Yep.
know, find someone in the art and get a feel for their competency. um and it's one of those things, it's a commitment. I think it's off-putting, you know, when people show up and they're seeing like the slow Sunim Tao and all that kind of stuff. Some people are going to be put off by that because, you know, there's so many great self-defense classes that people can take these days. Someone might stumble into a Wing Chun school and be like, okay, this looks great, but when am I going to learn stuff that you can use? And sometimes that's about managing expectations. Sometimes you have to say to people, listen, you know, you're going to pick up things, you know, relatively early on that may be practical for self-defense, but when you're learning a traditional or a classical system like this, you have to learn the foundation first, which means that people that go to a self-defense class, or you know, something like that, in the short term, they're going to have an advantage. And that's fine because they are learning techniques. They're going to their first class and learning a technique. They're going to their second class and learning a technique. With Wing Chun early on, the techniques are not always apparent to you. You're learning the foundation and the movements. And then the techniques reveal themselves much later. So people are off put by that because
Mhm.
they want something tangible they can work with right away. So I think, interested in your opinion on this. How do you prioritize, particularly for newer people coming to check out your class and what have you? How do you prioritize stuff that they can perhaps take away from the very first class and apply right away if they needed to? Um, how soon do you give out the goods, in other words,
Sure.
or are you more insistent on the foundational stuff first? How do you prioritize that?
So it's interesting because this is something I've seen happen in two different ways. The very first thing I have to assess is someone's gross motor function and movement ability.
Yeah,
Um, how coordinated is a person? How am I starting at a deficit that I need to build up to then to get into building, the rest of it? Um, and more often than not, if I start if I have to start at a deficit with somebody's mobility and movement, that alone by the end of the first class is a big thing for them to take away. And I've had that happen where they've gone, wow, I didn't know I could move like this because they just don't do it. Oftentimes, myself, I sit at a desk most of the day. I'm behind a computer doing meetings and appointments, and it's getting up and for somebody who doesn't have a regular exercise routine, you lose your mobility and
sure.
you lose your range of motion very quickly. Um, so it's um, meeting people where they're at as far as their movement goes, and then just making a quick assessment of okay, this is kind of how much motor, gross motor function movement we're going to be working with. So let's build there. Oftentimes, what I like to do in a beginner's class for a person's first class, the two things I really want them to be able to walk away with is the punch and the pock. Um, y- the horse will come in time. Iji Kim Young Ma is a very weird pigeon-toed stance, and you'll work on it again and again over time to get that going. But if they can get the fist in the center, push it forward with the elbow, and then they can get the hand to do this and just a simple pocking motion to the center line. Great. Those two things. Once those two things can be done great, by the second class, we can start doing pox out drill.
Yeah.
And then I can show them at the end, towards the end of that second class, hey, this is how you would apply this and why we're doing it this way. So, relatively, I try and provide an opening pretty early on for them to understand how a simple idea might work. And I always use Poxel because to me it's the simplest drill. It's the first drill I teach, first partner drill I teach students. Um, because it's just to me it's the simplest. Everything else from there has an increased level of complexity to it. But even then, within Poxel, you have Poxel, Pakda, Pakda with a step, you know, and really from there, by the students' second or third class, we're also working on basic footwork, stepping forward, which getting a person to step forward is surprisingly can sometimes be surprisingly a complex situation.
Well,
Um,
it's something we spend a lot of our day doing, but we don't devote any, conscious brain power to it. It's so
yeah,
automatic. It's a bit like somebody to, tell you about your breathing. You're like, hang on, I've been breathing all day and
mhm,
not thinking about it, and now I've got to think about it.
got it.
It becomes a whole
Yep.
different equation. And
Well,
right, left.
yeah.
Yeah, your brain knows how to do that
To,
automatically, but you have to start thinking about it
to,
where you've perhaps never had to
yeah.
think about it before.
Yep.
Um, that can be tricky.
But it is a great example. But think about it again. Let's bring it back to Sunum Tao. We're sitting here like this, and what was always especially for the beginners, the one thing Sifu would always say, we'd be doing something. He goes, "So what's your other hand doing now?" come to realize the other hand had moved itself inward and is
Yeah.
now resting on. Oh, no, no, separate it back out. All of a sudden, there it is again. Back. And he said, that's another thing. Wing Chun, the getting both hemispheres of the brain to work at the same time to train the two hands to do two opposite things at the same time.
Yeah.
Um, but again, that goes back to needing to build these kind of motor functions in a person. Um, so for me, for beginners, it really comes down to what am I working with? Because I've had a student come to me for some private lessons, and he had a very phenomenal just range of motion, good muscular strength. I was able to get him. We would do a private lesson, and we were doing all the footwork and then going straight into drills and drill combos relatively quickly. He just had that much physical mobility and his vocabulary of movement in him. It was easier to teach him that.
Is this somebody that had a martial arts background, or did you
A
get them
little bit.
basically fresh?
He had a little bit of a martial arts background, a little bit of a Wing Chun background, JKD background.
Sure.
But he was very. He told me, he said it was very minuscule. He only got to do it for a few months. But he had shown me other stuff he did. He was, very athletic person. He had played sports for I think IMG and things like that. So he just had a high movement vocabulary to
That's
him.
great. Yeah.
Yeah. Versus another student I had who has older gentleman, not over the years built up tension and stuff in the body like we all do.
Yeah.
And that's where we're working at it with him is getting him to just do how to relax and just do the basic forward punching, pocking, things like that. And that's, and then trying to translate that into, I think he had his third class with me last week and we got him to do Pak Da and Tan Da. And it okay, very basic movements for him, but he was getting it. He was starting to get it, that basic movement where and that's one of those I want to be able to translate that to them relatively quickly that it is applicable in real life, but
Cool.
at the same time ensuring that I'm teaching them the correct movement patterns to be able to do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've seen stuff where people are basically the joke that Wing Chun people just play patty cake. Like I've seen people teach patty cake and like, okay, it's
Yeah. That
yeah,
kind of stuff, it used to hurt my feelings.
yeah,
And yeah, that's part of the reason I don't follow a lot of things on like Facebook in
mhm,
particular anymore. Because yeah, of all the Wing Chun stuff that you see, 9 out of 10, to be generous, you're thinking, is this what you would want someone outside of Wing Chun to see as their first look at what we do?
mhm,
They're going to think we're a joke.
yeah,
I don't worry about that so much anymore. I believe people are going to think what they want to think.
yeah,
And admittedly, it looks kind of silly. When we're in the
yeah,
park and we're doing the slow Sudim Tao,
tell,
that part of your brain is always thinking like, oh, somebody walking their dog is going to think we're complete weirdos. And maybe they're right.
yeah,
Um,
most
but
certainly,
eventually you get to the point where it's like it's not about them. I'm doing this for me. What I'm doing makes sense. And yeah, it looks silly, but guess what? I'm
yeah,
sure there are things that you do in your house that are silly as well that you wouldn't want people to see. But yeah, I think it's obviously it's a great pursuit, whatever you want out of it. Some people
yep,
want to learn some applicable stuff straight away, and I think that's a
mm,
fair thing for people what to want to expect if they're paying money in particular. You want to give them something they can work with. But yeah, my mind has always been the fundamentals are so important, and if
yep,
you take the time to examine them properly, then the applications that you take out will be far superior, and adaptable as well,
yep,
because you will have the wisdom to know how to
yep,
alter the application according to certain
yep,
cues, certain situations that you can
yep,
only really get that kind of insight from examining the fundamentals on a very detailed level. And it
yep,
takes patience.
yep,
But that, occasionally you come across people that have the patience to really look into the details, and
Yep.
you know, we have to be thankful for those kind of people, because yeah,
Yep.
for some it's um not something they spend a lot of time on. They want to look at the flashy stuff, and it's like, no,
Yeah.
you know, you got to start with the foundation.
Yep. Well, and another kind of thing to avoid just teaching experience wise, especially teaching beginners and getting people into things, is you can't necessarily jump right into the deep end because you can't teach that much material to a person on their first day.
Sure.
One of the biggest mistakes you can ever make as a new teacher is over teaching. And I get it because you're really excited and you want to share and you'll be like, okay, and you have to do it this way because then this leads to and you get on that rabbit hole of being like over explaining. Whereas, you know, again, we're on step F and the person is still on step B. He's like, I got
Hmm.
step A, step B. And you just again, you just have to meet people where they are. And some people can be in step C, but oftentimes, especially with a beginner, it's here's step A and B, A, B, A, B. And you have to be okay with they're going to sit here for an hour doing that.
Yeah.
And if they really want it and they appreciate it, in my experience, people have give them what they need, which is step A to step B, but then give them a taste of step C or
Sure.
step D so they can not feel like they're just, Sifu and his famous story of I sat there and punched for 6 months. That's all they'd let
Yeah.
me do. We can't do that anymore.
Right.
But we
Not
can
the best business model. Yeah.
no, not at all. But we can get, like you said, get those fundamentals down and spend a good time on those fundamentals, but also give people a taste of the end of class, of towards the end of their first class, like, hey, this is what you're doing now, but this is what it becomes.
Yeah.
And then they go, "Oh, okay." So they can see the carrot at the end of the stick.
Yeah.
Yep. So,
Cool.
mhm.
Cool. Now, in a few moments here, I'll dump our long awaited hypothetical question that a friend of your podcast has kindly submitted. Before I get to that, were there any other things on your mind this week? Anything you wanted to necessarily get off your chest that you had been brewing on?
Not so much. I will say this. One thing I just, hey, what have I been doing this week? I've been spending a goodly amount of time doing my own personal training, but also training with some other friends of mine outside of Wing Chun. Um, and one of the big things, and again, we talk about movement vocabulary. One of the things I think is really important to me, and this is just my thoughts for the week of expounding that movement vocabulary, but then bringing it back to kind of this is my alphabet, and then playing with other languages, for instance, and
Sure.
saying like, oh, okay, so they put the adjective here in a sentence. What happens if I put the adjective there in the sentence? Does it break everything, or does it actually work? Or does it
Mm,
create an interesting linguistic play? But taking it back to your example of music, of like, okay, well, I play, this type of music, and then okay, well, I'm gonna go learn. What was it? Great example. Was it the guitarist for Megadeth ended up going to Japan to create J-pop or something like that because he just wanted to play with a
yeah,
different
that sounds
genre.
about right. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure which guitarist it was. Marty Friedman's probably considered like the best of the guitarists from Megadeth. Megadeth are one of those bands that and
Yeah,
I love Megadeth to death. Pardoning the pun there, but they're one of these bands that's famous for having like 100 different band members over the years. Dave
yeah,
Mustaine is notoriously a pain in the ass to tour with and record with. So there's been a whole uh, sequence of various different bandmates and combinations. But Marty Friedman was considered to be the guitarist of Megadeth in their prime. So I don't know if that's who you're referring to. I think I want to say Petrelli played with them for a little while as well. So that might be the guy that went off to do his thing. But yeah, that sounds about right. It's always funny when you think of these guys from a particular niche and you know them for that, and then they go off and do something and you're like, okay, where did that come from? I didn't know that about you, you know?
But you know, and that's the thing, is like when you become a obsessive about it, I'm going to use that word just to self-describe myself. Um, you 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 stop getting defensive about the thing you do, and then you start becoming interested in the way other people do that similar thing.
Yeah.
Um, you know, training with Rick Hutton sensei, it's not so much that I'm like, oh, Shotokan is such a great karate style, great martial art. It's a good martial arts, great style. But Rick's movement vocabulary and the way he has figured out how to deliver power and things like that, that's what it's like, oh, okay. That's really interesting. Here's how I move. Here's how he moves. All right, I need to train with him because I want to understand that, and how can I apply that to me?
Yeah.
It's things like that when you get really interested and into what you're doing. Like,
Yeah,
so
well,
that's
I'm really pleased for you
yeah,
that you found these guys, because of course
yeah,
a lot of people in the Wing Chun community will say, well, if you're studying Wing Chun, you shouldn't involve yourself with like a super hard style like karate or whatever. There's
yeah,
always been these myths that
yeah,
they would be completely incompatible, but
mm,
the DNA is so similar in several notable places. There's
yeah,
obviously common ancestry there if you want to go back far enough. So there's always things that you can see and learn in other styles, even if you perhaps wouldn't apply it
yeah,
exactly the same way with your Wing Chun principles. But yes, if you have your eyes and ears open, and it sounds from what you described that you've got a great group of guys over there
yeah,
that can basically explain to you what's happening and why it's happening.
mm,
There's always good takeaways. It doesn't matter what style you do. I'm of the opinion you can learn from anybody. You
absolutely.
should
Yep,
learn from anybody. Nobody is beneath learning from.
yep,
I mean,
absolutely.
they let you know pretty quickly if what they have to say is not worth listening to.
And,
Most people do
and
us that courtesy.
that's the thing. Keep an open mind, because
Yeah,
I've gone to plenty of seminars and been like, that was an experience. I'm not
yeah,
going to repeat that experience, but that was an experience.
sure.
So,
Cool.
absolutely.
Okay. Well,
Uh,
yeah, if there's nothing else, I think I probably wanted to get to a submitted question. Word was getting around a few weeks ago, a month or so ago, that we were going to be doing a podcast together.
mhm,
So I had, I had put the word out that I was, potentially taking, questions from followers, subscribers. I did get a question. This person, I don't know if they're serious or not, but they're calling themselves the Kung Fu Genius,
who the
which
hell
sounds
calls
entirely
themselves the
pretentious. I don't know why anybody would take themselves so seriously as to call themselves a Kung Fu Genius, but
calls himself
nevertheless,
a kung fu
um,
genius? Okay.
yeah, I mean, this is how they refer to themselves.
And next thing you know, he'll be having his own podcast calling himself the kung fu genius.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the kind of person that would do that. But nevertheless, this so-called Kung Fu genius has submitted a hypothetical question for your attention. And,
Okay.
I mean, this is serious. This is serious stuff now, Topher.
All
So
right.
if Master Wong, Master Tu, and DKU were locked into a room and had to duke it out to the death, how long would it be before people completely forgot about them?
I've never heard of any of these people.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know.
Who?
They must be some really talented martial arts celebrities, but they're obviously not on like Grandmaster Baxter level if we
Oh,
haven't heard of them. So
look, I could tell you some things about Grandmaster Baxter for
yeah,
another time. For another time.
of course, of course.
I'm unfortunately to the Kung Fu genius.
Mm,
Um, I've never heard of any of these three people.
yeah,
Uh,
probably just made it up.
you know what? I know a guy named Dryson who makes up a lot of nonsense like that. So
Really? Is he the kind of person that submits hypothetical questions?
more than he ever should. More than he ever should.
Do you
Uh,
do you think this Dryson person and this so-called kung fu genius person might be the same person?
I have my suspicions.
Hmm.
I have my suspicions.
Well, maybe one of these days we'll get to the bottom of that because big if true, right?
Big if true. Groundbreaking. Internet breaking, as the kids say these days.
Hmm.
Oh, all right. Well, I think that's all we have time for today. So, Sihang, thank you so much. It's great
Oh, it's
chatting
been my
with you.
pleasure.
Absolutely. Let's get together again sometime and do it again.
Awesome. Anytime.
Absolutely. All right. Have a good one.
Yep. Peace out.